Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Unlimited Mindset Tips, Tools, and Inspiration for Women in a Time of Change. I'm your host, Valerie Friedlander, ICF certified coach, sociologist, intersectional feminist, artist, mom, and nerd. And today we are talking about dismantling corporate gaslighting and creating a culture of truth lighting. And my guest is Falguni Shah, who is the founder of For Truth Lighting. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm happy to be here.
So I'm going to read your bio for everyone to hear, and then we will dive in. Dr. Falguni Shah shares her expertise as a researcher and professor focused on advancing trust by building responsible and bias-aware systems. Founder of Truth Lightning, a human-centered leadership and coaching practice, and author of the best-selling book From Gaslighting to Truth Lightning, a new framework for advancing fair opportunities for women in the workplace. Dr. Shah has 20 plus years of experience in healthcare and organizational leadership. Her current research focuses on talent management, leading diverse global teams, and the correlation between qualities of leader-follower relationships. I am so excited to talk about all of this. I mean, as somebody who has experienced corporate gaslighting and worked with people who have been navigating these things and not knowing that that's what they're dealing with, I think this topic and your work is so important. As we get started diving in, I always like to ask, what is a limit that you had internalized, that you were not aware of, that you since unlearned, and how did you unlearn it?
It is self-doubt for me. As I published the book, which is now a number one bestseller on Amazon under human resources and personnel category, um, I interviewed a number of women for the content of my book, and I realized that women are gaslit at workplaces and it undermines their self-confidence and their self-trust. And as I was preparing for the introduction of my book and writing about my own journey and the purpose, I was reflecting on my own leadership journey. And I realized that as much as there's an external component to gaslighting, there is an internal component to gaslighting. And I realized that I perhaps may be gaslighting myself and my own abilities, creating a subtle form of anxiety every time I need to perform or every time I'm taking a new challenging task. And we all internalize to a certain extent the messages that we have received as we're growing up through our life experiences, and we create our own narratives and our own stories that we tell ourselves, right? And so these stories are not always enhancing our confidence or trust. And so as I launched my book and I started speaking about my book and putting myself out there, advocating for myself, that's when I really unlearned this limit of doubting myself. And as I kept putting myself out there more and more, I realized that I'm getting more and more confident. And I realized that nobody else knows the content of my book the way I do. So there's really no reason for me to have that limitation
Mhm.
when I'm going out there and speaking about the topic that I have researched for more than 5 years. And so now at this point, I've spoken in corporate events, I've done a number of podcasts, I've been on media, and I've spoken to a crowd as large as 200 plus individuals. So I think that by putting myself out there, believing in myself, I have been able to unlearn that limitation.
Mm, yes. Yeah. I that was something that actually really stood out in your book that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about. So I'm really glad. I always love that question as a starting off point just because I think it often ties so well into what we're talking about. And um it was towards the beginning you mentioned imposter syndrome, which is something that, I've done a lot of looking at when I first heard the idea that imposter syndrome was a way of pathologizing, individualizing and pathologizing an external environmental dynamic. I was like, Oh my gosh, yes, it is. And so much of what your book is talking about is looking at that. And what you said in the beginning was imposter syndrome became the driving factor for success. And I
Hmm.
was really curious, and you kind of touched on that just now of like, but it sounds like in some ways it was motivational, which oftentimes when people think of imposter syndrome, they think about this demotivation, right? This like you
Right.
shouldn't do this. I'm curious about what you mean by like that it was a driving factor for you.
Yes. And in my book, I talk about it as an imposter's ambition.
Hmm.
Because that internal drive that we all have, right, to succeed, to share our purpose, to share our goals with the community. And once you kind of realize that, which I realized through my own experiences as I was being gaslit, I was like, do I want to do something about it? Or do I want to just keep feeling like, I'm a victim of this imposter syndrome? And that's when I decided to give it a purpose and said, okay, I'm going to bring these voices forward and I'm going to create awareness around this and motivate leaders to kind of level up and appreciate and acknowledge other people's reality and empower and encourage them rather than create more self-doubt or feed into that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it sounds like really a big piece of it was recognizing that it wasn't actually yours, that it was
Hmm.
being done to you. And
Correct.
so often, I think women don't always realize, it may be more so now than, 10 years ago when I was in corporate. Like, I knew that there was something wrong, but I
Mhm.
didn't know, I still hadn't quite figured out, like, when you're fighting yourself and it's not you. You can't really get anywhere there when you can recognize that this isn't mine. This is, somebody's dumping sludge into the water that I'm swimming in.
Mhm.
So what am I going to do about it? What do you find is helpful when someone has internalized, like it's inside me, but I don't know that it didn't come from inside of me. I think it's mine. What have you found that's helpful in helping people recognize that it's not theirs?
Yeah, I think that introspection really helps with understanding where this is coming from. And for me, it's because of my counseling training and my therapeutic training that I've had that we, as part of the training, we're made to unpack a lot of things that we have learned, right? But I think that journaling, introspection, speaking to people who can give you that insight, a different perspective, can always help to recognize where this is coming from, how does it really impact me, and is it really me? And what part of it do I own? And what can I do about it? So I really see introspection as a key quality in just understanding yourself and also understanding your own leadership journey and where you can take accountability.
Hmm. Okay, so you just used a word that I hear used a lot, and I
Mhm.
I often have this sense of like you keep saying that word, but I don't think you mean what it actually means, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't I would love for you to share a little bit about accountability
Mm.
and what that actually means and where you see that word misused.
Mm.
And I know you have a lot of exercises in the book, but maybe it relates to one of those and maybe it's just something like helping people who I think the people who recognize that it's not being used correctly are often the people who are being harmed by the lack
Mhm.
of it, not the people who are like, that's it's just fine. So what does accountability mean? What does it look like? And what can people do? I want to say both in terms of advocating for it, but also maybe recognizing that they're not using it correctly on the flip side.
Mhm. Mhm. So I think of accountability as really two things. One is a sense of ownership, and number two, it comes from being transparent with yourself and being transparent with others. And so if I talk about, like you said, people who are on the receiving end of lack of accountability easily tend to point it out. But as leaders, we have to introspect, like I said earlier, on where we can do things differently. Leaders naturally are in that position because they have a sense of ownership, right? They are tied to the vision, mission, and the vision and the strategy. And the expectation is how can the followers align themselves with that mission, vision, and strategy? And so, what is it that I can do as a leader to make that clear and transparent, to have that effective communication, to communicate clearly what are the expectations, to understand what the expectations are of you as a leader. And am I, as a leader, walking the walk and talking the talk? Is something that I consider accountability and individuals who are accountable to think about.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think about misuse part of your question. It's easy to point finger at somebody else and say, hey, they're not accountable. But I think what we can control is our own behavior at the end of the day. And it is bound to reflect on the other person if we are upholding that value that we believe in. And that change that we own is something that we have the control over, and we can be the change that we want to see in others.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that is it's really hard when you see things that are not right happening to
Yes.
want to, like finding that balance between, well, I don't even know if it's a balance. I'm thinking about this as we're talking in terms of I very much believe in that self-accountability, like thinking that introspection, the mindfulness, the reflection of like what's my part and what's not my part. And sometimes my part is advocacy, which
Mm-hmm.
can look and feel like I saw a thing a while ago talking about when you insist on accountability to people, or that accountability can feel like an attack when someone isn't willing to look at themselves, that they're not
Mm-hmm.
willing to look at their part. It feels like a threat and an attack. And one of the things that you say in the book that really stood out to me, um, the that leaders often exhibit territorial behavior, which erodes trust and collaboration across teams and departments. And that speaks to me of that scarcity mindset, like your achievement is a threat to me,
Mm-hmm.
which inherently blocks innovation, right? Like I
Yeah.
can only go so far in my own head. I might be brilliant, but like my ideas only exist in the perspective that I contain in myself, which
Mm-hmm.
limits so many other possibilities. Do you find there's something that helps people? Maybe there's an exercise or a question that really helps people step into recognizing, oh, I'm operating in scarcity. I'm operating from this
Mm-hmm.
internalized hierarchical mentality that's making other people's success feel like a threat to me.
Mm-hmm. So I have a few exercises in the book. One of them is building effective communication, which will help leaders kind of understand how to build that relationship of trust. I think that lack of trust causes all of these issues, and this feeling of threat and this feeling of fear of speaking up. it's all because of that lack of trusted relationships. And so I think there is so many narratives and stories in the book and firsthand statements that are said by the managers that kind of builds that trust, and some statements that really undermine that trust. And so that's another power in the book, in addition to the tools, is those narratives, and they're really powerful. But there's another tool in it that talks about power and privilege and how are you understanding your own power in different situations. So although you may not be a supervisor, but you do have power in certain situations. And how do you recognize that power and privilege that you have and use it to your advantage? And also understand where your limitations are, and how can you um, use that power to advocate for others, like you said. So the managers that have the power can advocate for their direct reports across departments and say, hey, to this other director that I think I have the perfect person that you're looking for in your senior leadership team. That's the power of advocacy, when you start advocating for your people when they're not there, you know. And so yeah, there is I believe 6 or 7 exercises in the back of the book that can be used between teams, that can be used individually. There is another exercise called inclusive leadership competencies. This really helps you assess yourself, what your competencies are, and how can you develop those competencies and skills of an inclusive leader.
Hmm. Yeah, that piece of awareness is so key. And one of the things that I like that you do and that I try and do in the podcast is like speak to multiple audiences. Want to speak to the
Mhm.
people who are navigating the systems from a place where they're the ones that are being harmed by the system. And I want to speak to the people who are upholding the system because sometimes they're the same people.
Mhm.
And experiencing it, like I think about white women are often some of the most egregious oppressors in a workplace because of that proximity to power and the push to prove oneself. There's that sense of if I have to prove myself, so I have to push to prove myself, and other people's success. It's that glass ceiling, like now I'm standing on the ceiling, so in keeping other people down so that I stay in the top.
Mhm.
Like if I don't if other people come up, then I won't stay in the top of things. And that's something that so
Yeah.
trying to speak to both, but at the same time it's I think it's a challenge to speak to both audiences as well because there really is a very strong power differential that
Yeah.
occurs in the workplaces. So, how did you navigate that when writing this book?
Yeah, yeah. You know, sometimes it's important to recognize when this environment is no longer conducive or healthy for an individual, and when is a good time to make that change. Um, because, if the value and the mission and the vision doesn't really align with yours and you're not able to make progress, then it's something that is not in your control. And it's if that environment is not going to change, you've been speaking up, you've been calling out the behavior, but if it doesn't change, then that's when that internal readiness comes on for recognizing when is that good time for me to now make that switch.
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, I think so, because I think it's maybe it's also when you work with people, when you go in and speak, you're speaking to a room of people and they're coming from different perspectives,
Hmm.
different experiences, and some of them are like, I've been you. I
Mhm.
have been in that position, and some of them are white men in power, and maybe they're, interested, but their bias, their privilege has protected them from even realizing
Mm.
their bias. And so speaking to both audiences seems like it might be kind of challenging because in some ways they need to hear different things. So that's kind of I'm curious like
Yeah.
how you approach that.
Yes. And that's when, it's important to know that can you continue to swim in this water and for how long?
Hmm.
If it's really detrimental for you and for what you're hoping to achieve. Um, and some values and some principles in some organizations really don't work for some people.
Hmm.
They may not be valuing everybody. They are not focusing on those that are misrepresented or underrepresented. And so that's when one needs to realize and change that environment because, you cannot change other people, like I said earlier,
Hmm.
but you can find an environment that suits best for you. And it's not that simple. Like I said earlier, that internal readiness component is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the economy.
Mhm,
And
exactly.
ever, like what level of risk can you take on, but also risk. I think of risk not just in terms of, yes, there's the financial risk and the material risk, and then there's
Yeah.
the emotional, spiritual well-being risk.
Hmm.
Like you can be making plenty of money and be
Yeah.
well in that sense, but if it's breaking you down, I've worked with a number of women who have had adrenal fatigue. They had to leave a workplace
Hmm.
because they like we talk about burnout. We use that kind of like exhaustion. It when you're actually burnt out, it is so much more than exhaustion.
Yeah.
It is you are not functional
Hmm.
anymore. And that
Yeah.
really does happen to people. So I'm hearing in what you're describing in some ways, it's like, hey guys, look around. And if it's just a bunch of white men here, you have a problem. Like if you're losing all your people, then maybe there's something you need to look at because you're
Right.
losing people.
Right. And I was speaking to a company recently, where they wanted to bring me in for their leadership development training. And they were having such a hard time. They were like, we're losing minorities, we're losing women of color, but the leadership doesn't want to do something about it. Like they're not vested. They don't come to these meetings where they should be coming to. And so, how can we focus on retention? And what are some evidence-based practices that they wanted to bring me on, that help with retention and tell us some points that we can tell our leadership to say, hey, this is high time now, and this is what needs to happen if this needs to change.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you handle that?
So they bought my book
Hmm.
and they said, we're going to read your book and find some points that we can take to our leadership and say, we need to bring this person for leadership development at our organization. So that's where we left off with that organization. And I said, I will research evidence-based, peer-reviewed articles on what helps companies with retention, and I will email them to you, which you can use as part of your talking points.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I so often that seems to be a common thing that there's some
Mhm.
people who are like, either performative level of it from the higher ups or the higher ups aren't participating and HR recognizes this as an issue.
Yeah.
And what comes to mind as you're talking about this kind of going back to that the imposter position of like and what you personally did of taking action. Like I feel this, but I'm still going to take action anyway. And
Mhm.
it's one of the things that I often recommend, the baby steps of building confidence. You're not going to feel confident until you do a thing. You have to do the thing in order to feel the confidence. And so
Yeah.
recognizing this is I've internalized this, that I can break it down, and breaking it down looks like doing the things
Mhm.
and showing myself. And I wonder, like, if more women and people who are typically not given a voice and not uplifted in organizations actually owned their expertise and went off and
Mhm.
did their own thing and built, like, hey, I know how to run this. I know how to do these things. I'm
Mhm.
going to go build something else because I know how to do it.
Right. Yeah. And that's when that is what that happens when it's that aha moment when you recognize that, yes, I need to do something about this. Let me brainstorm and put things down on paper that I am good at, that I can do. And is this something that I need to venture and like you did, like do something on my own, start my own company. And I call that a hard reset, taking a look at, again, is this the right environment for me? Do I need to think about my own skill set and what can I do with that rather than, stagnate?
Mhm.
And make that hard reset and reclaim your purpose and reclaim your confidence and reclaim your truth.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Um, One of the things that I don't necessarily advocate for everybody to start their own business. It is not for everyone. And I think no matter what you do, having a team, whether, it might not be a team in your organization, but you mentioned several times about um,
Mhm.
getting some reflection, honest reflection from other people who know you.
Yes.
Having the people behind you. You had your grandmother's example, and not everybody has a powerful example of somebody who trailblazed. Like,
Mhm.
stepping into that space and then going, like, I will give my own example of stepping into entrepreneurship. I didn't have any examples of entrepreneurship. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And part of what
Mhm.
ended up happening for me was I looked to people who were not the best people for me to give me some guidance because I didn't know anything. And I was like, what am I doing? And so I first I before I even ask a question, I just want to appreciate the fact that you are bringing forward through your work, through this book, that message and that example of, like, you can do something different,
Mhm.
and sharing the story of your grandmother who did do something different. And so what would you what message here right now would you want to
Mhm.
give people who maybe haven't had that example before, who are like, I need to, I'm at that point where I have to make a change. Something
Mhm.
has to give. This doesn't work for me. What
Yeah.
message would you want them to know?
Just like you, I didn't know anything about writing a book, and I didn't know any authors before I ventured on this. I just reached out to people, and I would say, reach out to people that have done it, that are willing to support. There's a ton of people out there who want to help. It's just a matter of finding the right people. Um, and I also think that believing in yourself and taking that leap of faith and taking those baby steps, and in this day and age, I mean, information is at your fingertips.
Mhm.
So it's so easy to know what the next steps are. You can just put some prompts in the tools and you'll get like really good like marketing plan, for example. So I think that not being afraid is one of the key essential steps. And there are so many examples of role models of people that have been able to do that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have examples in front of us, and so if they can do it, you can do it.
Yeah. You don't have to know them personally.
Right.
And you can also reach out to people. That's one of the things that I have found to be really wonderful and something that I always work to pay forward of like, you know, reach out, ask a
Mhm.
question. You might not get the answer you want. You might not get an answer at all. People are busy, but don't let that deter you from trying and from trying again. And, the right person, the person who will be helpful will be there. Um,
Right. I do want to add that if you have an authentic message, if you are being true to yourself and if you're being authentic, um, then people do believe in your message and they do come forward when you ask for help.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that as we get towards the end, I realized that we didn't define gaslighting, and yes, people can look it up, but I really appreciated what you wrote about and how that differentiation. So if it's all right with you, I'll read um, what you wrote about the gaslighting and truth lightning.
Yes, and I would like to clarify something when you're done reading about gaslighting.
Yeah, okay. So gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person or group makes someone question their reality, memory, or perception. It often involves denial, misdirection, contradiction, or lying to make the victim feel confused, doubtful of their experiences, or even mentally unstable. It commonly occurs in relationships where one person wants to control and undermine the other. In the workplace, it can take the form of dismissing concerns about bias, denying unequal treatment, or making employees feel like their struggles are imagined. And truth lightning illuminates the truth, affirms reality instead of distorting it, and reinforces trust rather than manipulation and deception. It is an intentional effort to bring transparency, honesty, and accountability to workplace interactions, particularly in hiring, promoting, and leadership development. And there's a visual that I think of that of a an object that is square, or no, it's not square, it's like a cylinder, and there's a light shining on one side that's creating a circle um
Mm,
shadow, and then a light shining on the cylinder side that's creating a square, and that perception of, well, no, it's a circle, and no, it's a square. Truth lighting seems to be that, like, well, let's understand what the object is that's casting the shadow, instead of
mm,
digging, doubling down on, no, no, there's a square here because I experience a square and thus it is a square. And
mm,
then you're gaslighting the person who's seeing the circle. And usually there's a systemic or organizational power dynamic that uplifts the square seeing people versus the circle seeing people.
that's a great an analogy. Um, and I think the crux is that you're appreciating both perceptions. Somebody can see the same thing differently than you do. And so it's that acknowledging and saying, agreeing that, okay, this is your reality, but that's not how I may see it, but just appreciating that perspective of that different perspective. But what I wanted to share is that, gaslighting, we've known gaslighting based on a movie that came out years ago, right? And there's
Mhm.
a victim and there's abuser, but then um, it's not always men. It's anybody who is in the position of power. So it's not really an attack on men, is what I wanted to clarify. But then there's also subtle forms of gaslighting where we're gaslighting ourselves or we're gaslighting um, in subtle manners. It's not really like a physical abuse or a verbal abuse. And When we think about truth lighting, it's essentially three behaviors. The first one is you're validating somebody's reality. So paraphrasing it back to them, using statements like, I hear you, I understand. So that's the first step is to validate and listen to understand. The second step of truth lighting is to provide affirmations. So this is the problem, and these are the solutions that you have identified. And I think based on the way I've known you, there's one, two, and three strengths that's going to make you successful. So you're providing positive affirmations. And the third one is giving actionable feedback. So those are three essential skills of truth lighting, and I urge everybody to practice them. It sounds really simple, but when it comes to day-to-day conversation, it doesn't come as intuitively.
Mm-mm. No, we're certainly not. We're very conditioned into either or thinking. And I would even encourage folks who have kids who are listening practice it with their kids because
Yes.
we parents often gaslight our kids without thinking about it because of that conditioning of like, I see it happen so much in urgency. Like
Mhm.
more or and the faster we're pushed to move and we don't have what as you were talking about that time to think about ourselves, to reflect and to notice things. That when we're in a rush, that's when we shut down any other possibilities or opportunities or anything and go right into, well, it's this way and only this way and not everything else feels like a threat.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So I really appreciate that distinction and those tips. Um, is there anything as we wrap up that you would really want the people listening to take away from this conversation?
Sure. Um, I think that there's three things that come up to mind. One is be authentic and build authentic relationship of trust and not based on trust and not based on transactional things that you need from them. Number two is be a lifelong learner and have that curiosity. And number three is to really lead with humility and collaborate with others and appreciate all the different perspectives that people may have.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much more richness in life when you do that. And I will add a fourth, which is to pick up the book. You can get it at all the places
Thank you.
that you get books. I mean, we really just scratched the surface of what's in here, and it's really wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me and scratching the surface of what you talk about. Um, as we wrap up, I like to invite two questions. And also just reminder before we dive into that there are links in the show notes for where you can get the book, where you can connect with Falguni, all of the things. So please check out the show notes and reach out with your questions, book her for a speaking gig if you're hearing stuff and you're thinking, yes, I have people who need to hear this. Um, all the notes are everything's in the show notes. That's what I'm trying to say. So, as we wrap up, what does it mean to you to be unlimited?
So I think sky is the limit if you set your mind and heart and soul and purpose to whatever it is that you want to do. So anything is possible.
Hmm. Yeah. And I have a playlist for songs for my guests that they like to listen to when they want to tap into that sky is a limit, unlimited feeling. What song do you listen to?
So there's a number of songs, but one that comes to mind right away is Let It Go from the movie Frozen, especially because it talks about not caring what other people say, not really succumbing to your fears and not let your fears control you. And it talks about breaking through, testing your limits. There's no right or no wrong or no rules. So I like
Mhm.
that part.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Don't buy into the perspective or perception that other people are placing upon you. You are you, and you are amazing and powerful and magical, and I love it.
Well said.
Thanks. Thank you again so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Valerie.